my name is Ranger Michelle. I work here at Rancho Penasquitos Adobe. I'd like to show you around our ranch house. One of the most significant things about this building is that it is the second oldest residence in all of San Diego County. Now, we didn't initially know that until restoration work began on this wing of the building. When we lifted these floorboards, this olive jar was discovered. Prior to that discovery, they thought that this ranch house was probably dated around 1860, and now we know that it was 1823. Another really interesting feature of this portion of the ranch house are the branding irons over here. This was actually a working cattle ranch pretty much since the first resident lived here in 1823, maybe even before that. And your cattle would just be grazing throughout the canyon, so you would need to brand them so that you could recognize which cattle were yours when it was time to round them up. This tool right here is called a running iron. It was discovered in one of the wells on the property here. Now, the reason it ended up in the well is you did not want to be caught with a running iron. It is the tool of cattle thieves. They could easily change the C on this brand to an O and then take off with that cattle. So this, you did not want to be caught red-handed with this. That's how it ended up in the well. So the next portion of the tour, we're going to go into the wing where we recreated what life was like between the 1860s and 1880s when the Johnsons lived here. George Johnson was a very wealthy man from New York who came to this part of the country during the gold rush, where he then met Estefana, a California woman. One of the interesting things about the ranch house here during the Californial period was you find a bed in most of the rooms. They initially thought that's because this was a hotel, but that's not part of Californial culture. Estefana was a very gracious host, and she had the financial means to put people up, to provide them with food and drink. So any travelers that came through this area were graciously welcomed and could stay for extended periods as a guest of Estefana. The next room that we're going to go into actually deals a little bit more with family life. I really like a lot of the antiques that we have in this room. This, for instance, is something that you don't see very often. It served as both the high chair for the baby, and it could also be altered into the stroller. How cool is that? Another interesting thing I want to point out, over here on the mantle, we have 2 dolls. It may look like 3. Which one of these is not a doll? It's actually this one right here. This is actually a seamstress model for designing dresses, because you couldn't just go down to the store and buy a dress at this time period. All the clothing had to be made for people. So the seamstress would design a dress and work with the woman who was buying it on this model, and then she would actually create the dress, use the fabric on a sewing machine, quite like this one right here. By the way, one of the interesting things about these oil lamps over here is that while most of the antiques that we have here in the ranch house were donated from different families in the area, these actually came from the time period. These lamps were found, I believe, in the barn and have been here throughout all that time in history. The next room we're going to visit is actually more of an entertaining parlor. If you can imagine traveling to California in the 1800s, it was quite a journey. You would have to take a ship from the East Coast down around the tip of South America until you arrived in San Diego Harbor. This is a luxury piece of luggage, and it indicates the wealth that a family like the Johnsons might have had because of the round top. So when you got, after that long journey, when you got to port, you wanted to be able to get off that boat as soon as possible and get on your way. So having the rounded top on here meant that your luggage got unloaded first and you could get on to the next segment of your journey. And so if you were traveling, say, to Los Penasquitos, or at least stopping here at the rancho along the way, you would be again hosted by the Johnsons. Estefana would likely have had entertainment in this parlor here. We do have a piano from that time period. It actually does work, although it's not in tune. But one of the interesting things about this is that in an age where you did not have electricity, you use candlelight. So this was both to see your keys and to be able to read your music. It's really fun to imagine someone playing by candlelight here and just entertaining all their guests of how different of a time it was. The next room we're going to go into is called the Cowboy Room, and you'll see why. Here we are in the Cowboy Room. This was an actual working cattle ranch all the way up until 1969. And some of the features in here that I'd like to share with you include this rope bed. Although this was much earlier, this was around the mid-1800s that you would make use of a bed like this. You couldn't go to Jerome's and buy a mattress, but you could use old lumber to construct the bed, and you could use a rope to make a nice mattress rather than sleeping on the floor. And if you've ever heard the term sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite, that comes from this style of bed. If you didn't want your rope bed to end up feeling more like a hammock, you would actually have to use this tool and tighten up all of your rope till you got up to your knot, and then you would retighten that knot. Hence the term sleep tight. That's where it comes from. Also in the Cowboy Room, we have this armoire. And this is pretty interesting because when California became a part of the United States of America, the federal government started imposing taxes on the property. And each closet would have been taxed as a room. So this was a way to get around that. It's a piece of furniture. It's not a closet. Didn't have to pay taxes there. I'd also like to show you, in this case, we have the chaps that were worn by one of the last cowboys that actually worked this ranch. These are actually fancier chaps than you would have worn for day-to-day work. It was more of your parade chaps, shall we say. And we're gonna go now to the front entrance of the adobe, where you can imagine Estefania gazing out, watching as her guests came up from San Diego. If you can imagine back in the day, this is the very porch where Estefania would have been either seeing visitors off to San Diego or watching them arrive to come and stay at the adobe. Today, it's still a beautiful place to come and relax, enjoy the scenery, and feel that sense of going back in time. So I'd like to thank you for taking a tour with me today of Rancho Penasquitos Adobe. If you'd like to learn more about this park or many of our other county parks, please visit us at sdparks.org.